Here's a question I was wondering. Can My Little Pony pull off a good spin-off? What would it be like if we were to take the characters from My Little Pony and create a new series that was set in Equestria someplace? Perhaps do a story filmed from Manhattan or Philadelphia or Appaloosa, or one of the other many locations like Tantalot or something else. Or maybe even put the entire focus of the episode on one character, or change the genre of the series, or the art style, or any number of other things. Even set it in the future or the past, or any number of many other ideas. To find out if a My Little Pony spin-off would be successful or a failure, let's think about some of the other shows that have had dramatic cast changes or spin-offs or whatever else. In the case with MASH, we had a number of different characters written off of that series, such as Henry Blake, Frank Burns, Radar, and Trapper John. Each of them replaced by Colonel Potter, BJ, Charles Winchester, and Max Klinger gave up the cross-dressing routine to take over Radar's job and had a change in his character. MASH also spun off from itself after MASH and Radar, both of which went practically no place and failed. MASH's success at adding new characters was pretty much a hit. Though you could debate over which seasons were better, there is a very noticeable change in the quality of the show with each new character who comes onto the cast or who leaves the show. The MASH spin-offs happened in an attempt to keep the MASH world going, but audiences just weren't interested. I'm not sure if they could have been successful if they had been done differently, or aired at a better time slot, or if they had put a little more time between MASH and its spin-offs. But that's not something I have a lot of episodes to judge by either, because finding after MASH episodes is difficult, and I've never seen an episode of Radar. Happy Days also had characters come and go, such as the loss of Richie's brother after the first season, and we never hear of him again and pretend he doesn't exist. The addition of Chachi, and the loss of Ralph Potsy and Richie himself, while the series keeps the Fonz and the parents. Jody and Chachi come and go. A couple of times attempt their own spin-off, it fails, and they return to the series. I've never seen the Jody and Chachi spin-off, but I do have to admit that without Richie, Potsy, and Ralph, Happy Days just weren't Happy Days. Pokemon had a number of cast changes, including Misty and Brock, both leaving the show and coming back and leaving again. And it had a number of additions like May and Dawn, who both came and left on separate occasions. Eventually, Pokemon reached a point where I couldn't follow it anymore, because I just got tired of Ash remaining a trainer and never aging, never improving himself, never becoming a master. It would have been nice to have seen Ash go to the Pokemon leads, face the Elite Four, defeat the Elite Four, defeat Gary, achieve his dream, and then retire and pass the torch on to another character, instead of keeping him around all the time and having him always be 10 years old. Ghostbusters did a couple of spin-offs. After the release of Ghostbusters 2, they brought on Lewis as a new character, made Slimer talk more eloquently so that he could be understood better, made Slimer more of the focus of the series, gave Slimer his own series of shorts where the animation style was changed and everything was more targeted towards younger audiences, and put Slimer at the focus of the stories, which I thought was part of what hurt the Ghostbusters series, not help it. Later, there was Extreme Ghostbusters, because 90s and extreme! This brought in a new cast of younger Ghostbuster characters whose looks and personalities were almost identical to the original team. Very unoriginal, very disappointing. Although they did manage to tell some fresh, new, interesting stories, and even had continuity with the original series, although continuity was a hard thing to see at times. But to me, Ghostbusters has never been about the original four and the New York location. It's always been about the technology and how the technology works. I always felt proton packs could be put on anyone and the setting to be any city in the world, and it would still be Ghostbusters. You don't even have to replicate the Peter Egon, Ray Winston dynamic. You just have to have a team that works well together. Avatar: The Last Airbender, we saw spin-off into Korra, with a major time skip of many years, some characters aging to elderly and some being killed off altogether. That series was very well done, and they got things very right. Yu-Gi-Oh! Did a number of spin-offs after it was done, but without Yugi and his friends to hold the story together, I just lost interest. Star Wars did its prequels in the form of Star Wars: The Clone Wars and Star Wars Rebels. Both of these shows telling stories that still use main Star Wars characters but don't focus on them. It's still set in the Star Wars world, but it's not about the main characters that we followed in the movie. So it still presents a very enjoyable thing, and the Star Wars universe is large enough that it can give us all sorts of fun ideas, and there's a lot of characters whose stories can be told, and as long as it's somewhere in that world, we can still enjoy it. With the case of Alf, we saw Alf, his series ended on a cliffhanger, and decades later they brought back just Alf and none of the other cast members to tell one more story. The story was okay, but could have really been better if they had brought back more of the original cast. Alf also spun off a number of other series, such as the Alf animated series and the Alf Tales animated series. The Alf animated series told about Alf's adventures on Melmac. It was interesting, but there was a lot of corny stuff that I could have done without, and I didn't think it really fit in with Alf's stories of Melmac. There was also Alf Tales. wherein Alf and his Melmac friends would do their own telling of classic fairy tales. These stories were not in canon with anything else Alf related, and was just the characters being recast in classic parts. This could be an interesting thing to see with My Little Pony, but I'm not sure how the community would receive the idea. In the case of Star Trek, we have Star Trek the original series, The Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, and Voyager, as well as Enterprise. But Enterprise is its own separate thing. The original series, of course, set in the past, and Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, and Voyager, all set in the same future era after the original series. All of the characters can cross over with each other at any time, even though they're in different locations. So at any point you can have the old characters that you knew from another series appear on the other series that airs later in the week. Enterprise, on the other hand, was set so far in the past that it had a couple of problems, like constantly interfering with its own continuity, and the fact that it being set in the past, you couldn't have the characters from Next Generation, Voyager, or Deep Space Nine appear in Enterprise, although they still found a way to work them into the series. Also had Enterprise way too frequently playing up on the sexual tension. Different World spun off from Cosby Show, and while it still used Cosby Show characters occasionally, it almost never needed to rely on those characters, and was very successful in its own setting, in its own location, with its own cast, and being its own thing. It outlasted The Cosby Show before finally ending, and had a good run without needing to constantly lean on the Cosby cast. Digimon has an interesting phenomenon going on, where the first two seasons are in canon to each other, and every season following that is not in canon, and the characters are all doing different things. And that's how some of the other TV shows that I know were successful or not successful by changing their cast, their location, the era that the show was set in, etc., etc., etc. Then you have other shows that do what I call the art style change, and that's what you see in Teen Titans versus Teen Titans Go, where the art style completely changes, the writing changes, the continuity of the first show is thrown out altogether. It's the same characters and the same voice cast, but everything else is so extremely different that it's like comparing apples and oranges. The question is, can My Little Pony do a successful spin-off series, or a successful change in the cast of its characters? Would it still be interesting if they wrote one or more of the main six out of the story and put the focus on some pony else? Would My Little Pony still be interesting if the entire episode was completely about Pinkie Pie or Applejack, and none of the other main six were featured ever again? Would it still be interesting if the art style changed, or if the voice cast changed, or if the writers changed? Leave what you think in the comments section below. Thank you for watching, and good night.